Hey there everyone, this is Peter, the mechanic at 630, and today we're in the garage. We're going to build the 630 Ride in the Park men's 7-speed. Today I just have a pair of scissors. That's what I'm going to start off with, and then we're going to go ahead and build with the tools that are in the box. Here we go. Cut the straps and open the box. Here's the bicycle, all packaged straight out of the box. Before we begin anything, I really want to point out the small box that also comes in the larger box. So we have the bike, all packaged, and then also the smaller box. This one's very important. I want to point this out to you because inside here is a part that we need to install the front wheel. A lot of times the front wheel is a little bit confusing for people who are novices to the bike world or unfamiliar with the quick release system. You do not need any tools to install the front wheel. We have a part in here that I'll show you right now to do that. I grab my scissors again, open that box. Inside here we have instruction manual, pedals, reflectors and tools, some touch-up paint. And right here, this is what I want to point out to you. This part is called the quick release skewer. This is how we secure the front wheel to the Ride in the Park. I'll show you how that goes, but please pay attention to this. You should never use any tools trying to install a quick release front wheel or rear wheel. Keep your focus on this quick release skewer right here, and we'll get the front wheel installed properly at the appropriate time. Today, I'm going to assemble this bicycle with the tools that are included in the box. If you have tools at home, what you need Allen wrenches, 4mm, 5mm, and 6mm. You also need regular wrenches, which will be a 9mm, 10mm, 13mm, 14mm, and 15mm. Also, Phillips head screwdriver. Included with the bicycle are Allen wrenches and a multi-tool. The multi-tool is a very basic rudimentary tool. It can get you by. I'm going to show you how to do it, but it's always recommended that you use actual wrenches if you can get your hands on those. Let's begin. I'll start off first with unpackaging the bike. I'm not going to unpackage it all the way. I like to leave some of the packaging on while I assemble just to keep the bike protected. I'm removing the front fender. Cut the zip ties to remove the front wheel. And then also the handlebars are secured by zip ties to the frame. At this point, just to get the handlebars out of my way, I like to take the plastic off of the handlebar stem, which is the part that inserts into the frame of the bicycle to hold the handlebars. I just go ahead and set that into the fork, down to the top of the head tube. And keeping that forward, you can also rotate the fork itself 180 degrees because the fork comes, for packaging, the fork is turned in the backwards direction so that the box can be more compact, and it's also safer so that the fork doesn't poke out of the box. Just make sure that the forks are curving outward to the front, and then also that the handlebars are facing forward. In the bottom of the fork, there's a fork protector, a little plastic piece that looks like this. Sometimes it's white, sometimes it's black. This is not part of the bike. This is just packaging that keeps the fork from penetrating the box during shipping. Now the bike will hold itself like this for the time being while we get the front wheel ready for insertion and securing it to the bicycle. So let's go ahead and pay attention to the front wheel now. We have some packaging on either side of the hub, the center part, a large black circular piece, and then there's a smaller black circular piece that has been inserted into the hollow axle of the hub of the front wheel. Also garbage, you can dispose of that. In the center of the front wheel is the hub. In the center of that is the axle. The axle is hollow. You'll notice that there's about an 1/8 inch of threaded axle on each end of the hub. The fork will rest on this tiny amount of material right here. It will rest right on that 1/8 inch or so of threaded axle. So what we want to do now, here's the front wheel. We'll take our quick release skewer, remove the nut and one spring. Go ahead and take the quick release skewer now and slide it through the hub, the hollow axle of the hub of the front wheel. Put the spring back on side. It's conical. Put the narrow end of the cone in first towards the center of the wheel. Reattach the nut. Just a few turns. You want that nice and loose. You'll see the quick release skewer is now inserted into the hub. You can lift the bike up, set the fork down onto the two ends of the axle, that 1/8 inch little part that's the threaded area that I was talking about. You can just rest on that. The quick release skewer has a lever on one side and a nut on the other. That can go on either side of the bike. Traditionally, it's going to be on the left side of the bicycle, which is the side without the chain. That's just so that you can hold it with your right hand because most people are right-handed. But it can go on either side. On this bicycle, the tires are non-directional, so that can also go either direction. You really can't go wrong just putting the wheel in either way. So with the quick release skewer, you want to hold the lever with your right hand over here, and then with your left hand, tighten the nut down until it's a little bit firm, but not as tight as you can get it. Then we're going to try the lever. We're going to close the lever and see how it feels. If it feels a little bit too easy, we'll open the lever again, turn the nut a little bit tighter, and then try again. What we want that feeling to not be impossible to close, but also not very easy. If you do it properly, when you are squeezing it closed with the palm of your hand, you'll have a little bit of an impression that will last for a few seconds in the flesh of the palm of your hand. There we go. Now, the wheel at this point is in there securely. It also spins nicely. You also want to make sure that it's absolutely centered in the fork. So when I look at mine, I can see that I have left it leaning a little bit to the left. That's probably because I was letting the bike itself lean onto the kickstand while I was installing it. I'm going to try again and just make sure that wheel is perfectly centered in the fork. This is an important step. This is called floating the wheel. This is necessary with just about any bicycle, especially ones that have the quick release while you're putting them in. Make sure that the wheel is absolutely centered in the fork. I'm going to remove the packaging from the fork now. Now's a good time to grab the 6mm Allen wrench. I like to stand right. We're going to secure the handlebars to the bicycle. I like to stand over the front wheel so that I can sight it with my eyes. We're going to line up the stem, which holds the handlebars into the frame of the bicycle, with the front wheel. And then with my 6mm Allen wrench, we'll tighten down the stem bolt right here. Check it again that it's aligned with the front wheel. And then a lot of the screws and bolts on a bicycle need to be tightened with some finesse. You don't want to just crank down them as hard as you can. Some of the bolts and screws are tiny and can strip or get ruined. With this one, Go ahead and give it everything you got. This can be about as tight as you can get it. You never want this stem to slip or rotate while you're riding. That would be a dangerous situation. Now I'll go to the bolt that holds the handlebar in the stem. We'll just loosen this one a little bit. I did about 3/4 of a turn just then. I'm going to rotate the handlebars up until the grips are approximately parallel with the ground. That's a good starting point. Later on, you may find that you like them rotated upward or even downward, your preference. For now, we'll start off with the grips parallel to the ground. Again, this is another bolt where you can go ahead and give it a pretty solid amount of torque. You never want those to rotate during riding. Let's go ahead and remove the packaging from the handlebars and the grips. At this point, before we proceed further, I like to go ahead and put the pedals in because there's no seat in my way or rack in my way. It's just a nice open area at the moment. So we'll go ahead and put the pedals in. The pedals have a couple things that you need to know about. Really, the main one is that there is a right pedal and a left pedal. This is important because they have two different thread directions. The right pedal has the regular right-hand thread that you're used to, righty-tighty. The left-hand pedal is reverse threaded, so this one is actually lefty-tighty, and it will only go onto the left side of the bicycle, the right pedal on the right side of the bicycle. I like to go ahead and we'll start with the right one. And just thread it into the right crank arm, again, righty-tighty. I can use my multi-tool, 15 millimeter, and tighten that pedal down. The left pedal. This one is reverse threaded again, so we'll turn it in the opposite direction that we're used to. You could say lefty-tighty instead of righty-tighty. Usually you can get it most of the way just using your hand and your fingers. And then when that stops, use the 15 millimeter opening on your multi-tool or your 15 millimeter wrench and tighten that down. Now is also a good time to go ahead and install the rear rack. We'll put the seat in later. It just kind of gets in the way while we're doing the rest of this, so it's nice to do this while we don't have the seat in. I'm going to go ahead and use our 4 millimeter Allen wrench to loosen the bolts for the rack. Place the rack onto the holes where the bolt is, and then reinsert the bolt to hold the rack in place. Now we can take the seat, which is attached to the seat post already on this bicycle, and we'll insert it into the bike. On the ride in the park, we have another quick release mechanism. This is for the seat post. You want to open the lever. This particular mechanism here also requires a little bit of explanation. It's very important that it is positioned properly. There's an opening towards the back of the a quick release seat clamp. That should be lined up with the slot, or nearly lined up with the slot that's actually cut into the frame. This will allow the frame to close in and clamp around the seat post. It works the same way as the quick release on the front wheel. You want to go ahead and, while the lever is in the open position, tighten the nut, and then you'll be closing it with a nice firm feeling right up until it nests right around the body of the clamp. If the lever is in any other position, if it's in, sometimes people will try to clamp it upward like this. It can kind of function that way, but it's not proper, and it will probably break eventually, and it won't secure your bicycle very well. It can't be closed this to the back. It has to be closed to the front and nesting against the body of the seat post clamp. So we'll go ahead and, with the lever open, tighten that nut down until it starts to stop spinning easily. Insert the seat clamp, and then we'll close the lever and see how well that secures our seat post. In this case, I have it a little bit tight. Let's open the lever again. We'll back the nut off. I did that about a turn. And then try it again. Still a little firm. A little firm on that one. Back off half turn. Close the lever again. That feels nice. It was not too hard to do, but it had a nice firm feeling, and then left an impression on the palm of my hand for 2 or 3 seconds. You can test the seat, see if it rotates in the bicycle. Also, I have the alignment off a little bit. I can just open the lever, straighten it out, reclose it. Okay. We essentially have the bicycle together. It can be ridden at this point. What we're going to do now is install the front fender, adjust the brakes, and adjust the gears. I'm used to working on the right side of the bicycle, which is the way that I've had it oriented for now. Now I'm going to turn it around so that you can see the right side of the bicycle, which has the chain on it right here. We'll start off with the brakes, and then we'll do the gears. With the front brake, you'll find that it's packaged with the cable detached from the brake lever at the handlebar. So we'll need to reattach that. This is for shipping so that they can have the handlebar zip tied down to the frame. Usually it's tucked up into the steer tube of the fork, also the head tube of the bicycle. Just pull that cable out like this. We're going to attach it to the brake lever now. So what we need to do is go ahead and find the part where the cable is attached to the brake itself down by the wheel by this 10mm nut. We can use the wrench, 10mm, to go ahead and loosen that. I just loosened that about 1 turn. That loosens the cable now. If you do that, you'll find at the end of the cable there's a little circular fitting on the end of the cable. Pull that out so that you have 2 or 3 inches of exposed cable. When you pull back the brake lever here at the handlebar, you'll find that a little metal tab comes out that also has a circular opening. This is where the end of the brake cable will attach. There's a slot in the front part, so you need to go ahead and take that circular end of the cable and bring it from the underside, and it fits just like a puzzle piece. The circular part goes in the circular area, and then the cable slides up in the slot. Now bring the cable around to feed through the slot in the body of the brake arm, of the brake lever. Now the cable is situated properly into the brake lever, and then go ahead and slide the black cable housing into its spot here on the brake lever. Now we can reattach the brakes. Before we do that, however, we'll go ahead and adjust the brake pads for the rim. Find your wrench again. This will be the 10mm again. What I like to do is just go ahead and loosen the pad just a little bit. That was about a half turn maybe. Bring the pad up to the position that you need to line up with the rim. You can hold it where you like it with your hand. and then tighten it down with the wrench. And then repeat for the other side. Loosen that about a half or one turn. Bring the pad into the wheel so you can line it up with the rim. And then retighten the nut to secure the pad in place in the position that you like. All right, now we'll go ahead and adjust for the cable tension. What I like to do for a starting point is close the brakes with one hand and then slide the cable housing down so that it's situated properly in the brake lever and then also in the brake itself. Pull the slack out of the cable, and while I'm holding it all the way up against the rim, I like to just go ahead and tighten the cable pinch bolt again to secure the cable to the brake. Make sure this is a fairly tight feeling because you do not want that cable to slip at all when you apply the brake lever. So now it's very tight, but you'll notice that because there's going to be a little bit of settling in with the cable, that it will open up a little bit. That's why I just held the brake pads all the way up against the rim. That's usually a pretty good place to start. Now I'll give the brake lever itself a few squeezes. And actually, it feels quite nice. It's about the right setting as it is because that cable will open out. You can't get it 100% tight. So just go ahead and hold the pads up against the rim like I did when you're tightening the cable. And then you'll find that the feeling at the brake lever is about right. If you do need to loosen it, you can let a little bit of cable out to get a little bit looser. Now, the brakes need to be centered. So in this case, if I pick up the front of the bike and rotate the wheel, it's rubbing on the right brake pad. That's because the brake pad is not completely centered. There are several different ways to address this issue. I'm going to show you the simplest way. There are other ways that they do it in a bike shop with a special tool. You know, it's not absolutely necessary to do it that way, although it can make it easier. But we can also address this situation by just loosening the nut that secures it in the back and then holding this in a more centered position and then retightening the nut in the back. I'll show you how to do it right now. So again, I will loosen this nut in the back, also the 10 millimeter again. That was, I think, about a half turn to loosen it. I'm actually going to overcompensate just a little bit. So I have the left pad touching now. This may just take a little bit of going back and forth. And go ahead and retighten the nut in the back firmly, but do not over tighten that. This can cause the springs to come out in the back. So just don't over tighten that one. It just needs to be firm. Give the brake levers a few squeezes. It still wants to pull over. So in this case, we can try it again. Good. So it's overcompensating. It's overcompensated now, so the left one is touching. I'm going to go ahead and tighten this back nut just a little bit more, which will move the center of the brake in. And then when I squeeze, it's centered now how I like it. When I pick it up, you can see that the wheel spins freely. And then when I apply the brake, catches nicely. So again, there's the wheel. This is how the wheel should spin when you have everything installed properly. Should spin around a few dozen times. That's the front brake. We'll repeat the process for the rear brake now. Again, the rear brake is already attached at the lever, so we don't need to reattach it like we did with the front one. Let's go ahead and set the brake pads. I'm going to loosen the pad with the nut that secures it to the brake. In this case, about a half a turn. I'll move the pad down until it contacts the rim properly, and then retighten it. There we go. That was that one. Now I'll do this pad. Just loosen a little bit. Move the pad where I like it. Retighten. Squeeze the lever, make sure the pads are contacting where they should. The tension feels good, although I feel like it could be a little bit tighter. I will go ahead and tighten that. So again, I'm going to loosen the pinch nut that holds the cable to the brake. I loosen that 1.5 turns there. Now the cable is free of the brake. I'm going to squeeze the brake all the way into the rim, take the slack out of the cable, and then retighten the pinch nut to re-secure the cable to the brake. Let's give a few squeezes, see how that feels. It's a little on the tight side. I can let a little bit of cable out. I can also use this barrel adjuster for smaller adjustments. To use the barrel adjuster, you want to back that little hex lock nut out. In this case, to give a little bit more slack to the cable, we'll turn the barrel adjuster in clockwise, which will let that cable have a little bit more room. Feel how the tension is. It's really nice. Now I feel like the front and the rear brakes both have a firm positive connection when I squeeze it, but it's not too loose or too tight. Feels really nice. In this case, when I spin the wheel, there's no rubbing of the brakes are clear. I could do the same centering process that I did on the front. Again, in a bike shop, there's a little more technical way to do it with a special tool, but you can get everything that you need by adjusting the centering and also by using the securing nut on the back side of the brake. The bike, again, is ready to ride now completely. We have the brakes done at this point. The only thing is that generally the gears will need some adjusting. You can take it for a ride at this point. The gears should work well, but may need some fine tuning. They even may need some help getting into one or two of the gears. I can walk you through this process. This is much easier in a bike stand because To shift the gears on a 7-speed, you have to be rotating the pedals, and that's the easiest, fastest way to also to adjust the gears. It can be done quite quickly in a bike stand. Without a bike stand, which most folks don't have at home, you can do it. It's a little bit of a slower process. I'll show you how to do it. First off, to start off the whole process, what we want to do is put the kickstand up. We're going to go ahead and take the shifter. We're going to put it into 7th, but we're not going to go there the whole way. We'll shift 1 or 2 gears down, pick up the back of the bike, and turn the pedals, and you'll hear it start to shift. Another couple clicks on the shifter, a few more rotations, and then put it all the way into 7th gear on the handlebar shifter, and then rotate the pedals. In this case, it comes right down into the 7th gear like it's supposed to. However, I can hear some chatter. I can hear a little bit of noise, like it wants to shift one direction or the other. So let's go ahead and address that. The bikes usually come already in 1st gear to keep the derailleur in towards the center of the bike for shipping. So the first thing that we need to do is lift the kickstand and adjust the gears in the 7th speed. The only tools that we need to make this adjustment is a Phillips screwdriver and 9mm wrench, which you can either use the multi-tool or your own wrench at home that you have, or an adjustable wrench. So let's go ahead, put up the kickstand. Because in a bicycle shop, the easiest way to adjust the gears is to put it into a bike stand, because you have to rotate the pedals to shift the bike. In this case, most people don't have a bike stand, so we'll have to kind of do this in stages, picking the rear of the bike up, turning the pedals while we make the adjustments. I'll show you how to do it. The first step is go ahead and start to shift the bike into 7th gear. So we'll click a couple turns, rotate the pedals. You can see it shifting. There we go, all the way into 7th. I'm all the way in the 7th gear right now. I don't know if you can pick it up on the video, but it's making a little bit of chattering noise. It's mostly quiet, but a little bit of extra noise there, so it does need a small amount of adjustment. There are shortcuts to maybe making this adjustment that we could get by with, but I always like to just start fresh at the very beginning and get the adjustment right from the start, get a good foundation. Otherwise, a lot of times you're just kind of fighting the different forces that are in the derailleur. So what we want to do now, go ahead and put the kickstand back down. Then we'll come around to the derailleur. Now that we have it in 7th gear, we can detach the cable from the derailleur itself. This will be the 9mm wrench. And we'll just loosen that nut. That was about 1.5 to 2 turns. You can see the cable can be moved back and forth. It's completely free of the derailleur. On the derailleur itself, there are 2 small screws stamped into the body of the derailleur. Near the screws, there's an H and an L, denoting the high limit and the low limit screw. I want to find the H. It's very hard to read. On this derailleur, the H is the more forward of the screws. And what we're looking for is, in a bike shop it's done a little bit differently. Usually a mechanic will do it by listening to how it sounds as they're setting the limit screw. We can't do that because we can't rotate the pedals at the same time that we're turning the screw. But what we want is there's 2 little gears or wheels on the derailleur. These are called pulleys, tiny little gear wheels. They need to be lined up with that 7th gear, which is the smallest gear on the freewheel. In this case, I can see that my derailleur is a little bit away from the center in relationship to the 7th gear. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the high limit screw in about 1/2 turn, which will physically push the derailleur in towards the center of the bike. That was maybe a 1/3 of a turn there on that screw. Just to see if it can line up with the 7th gear a little bit better. Let's go ahead and check it and see if it got a little bit quieter. Put the kickstand up, turn the pedals. Still making a little bit of noise. Let me try that again. see what happens. I may be going in the wrong direction. We can find that out on this next turn. It's much easier to do this by sound than by sight. If this makes more noise, then it means that I'm going in the wrong direction, so then we'll correct. There you go. You can hear it make a lot more noise. So I've turned the high limit screw in too far, so it's really trying to shift into sticks right now. So I will undo those turns I just made. So I'll back it out about a full turn to get back to where I started, and then I will go past that another half turn or so. To allow the derailleur to actually come outward from the center of the bike a little bit. It should be quieter now. You can hear that's perfect. It's in 7th gear perfectly. It's not making any noise trying to shift off of the gear to the outside of the bike or trying to shift into 6th. At this point, we have the shifter on the handlebar in 7th. We also have the gear perfectly actually in 7th with the derailleur. So since the shifter in 7th and the gear in 7th are compatible with each other, at this point we can reattach the cable. So we'll get the 9mm wrench. Now without moving the derailleur inward or outward, take the slack out of the cable as much as you can. And then we'll secure it with the nut, 9mm again. At this point, we'll see how it shifts. Now, we'll just do this one gear at a time and bring it up. So I'm in 7th right now. I'm going to lift my kickstand. With the shifter, I'm going to take it one turn to 6th gear, and we'll see if it shifts. Usually it won't because there's too much slack in the cable, so there's an easy way to correct for that. Let's see what happens when we've shifted into 6th. In this case, it did shift nicely into 6th. I noted a little bit of hesitation, so let's take just a tiny bit of tension out of the cable. You'll see where the cable housing dives into the derailleur. There is a ridge knob called a barrel adjuster that can be turned with your fingers. In this case, I'm going to turn it, I'm going to just give it one click counterclockwise. Now I'll apply a little bit more tension on the cable. I'm going to shift back into 7th. Nice. Into 6th. Perfect. 5. A little bit of hesitation there. See that? Let's put a little bit more tension on the cable. I'll turn it one more quarter click. I'm going to shift back into 6th. Into 5th, right into 5th, 4th, right into 4th, here goes 3rd, 2nd, and 1st. That went right in there. Every now and then it doesn't want to go into 1st. That's because the low limit screw is in too far. If you're having trouble getting from 2nd to 1st, but all the other gears are working correctly, you'll need to back out the low limit screw, which is the other screw that has the L. And on this bike, it's towards the rear of the bike. You could just turn that out maybe a half or one turn counterclockwise. So the last step is to install the front fender. The front fender is rather simple, but there are some considerations. One of which is that the front fender is probably the one part on the bike that's not a precision part. It's going to go in, it will be approximate. As you can see, it's just a small piece of metal that can be twisted one way or the other. When it goes into the bicycle, it's almost never going to be exactly where we want it to be. We could just adjust it by using the hardware, by loosening the hardware that attaches it and pushing and pulling on the fender. Also, after all the hardware is fully attached and tightened, you can also just pull on the fender to adjust it into position. All we're looking for is that it looks nice and that it is also not touching the brakes or the tire or the wheel, and also that it can perform its function of guarding us from water spray. So here we go. We've already addressed the brakes here. We're going to have to redo them a little bit, but the main thing is that we got them right in the first place. I think that's important to go ahead and do that without the front fender. It just makes it easier and also puts the focus on adjusting the brakes for the wheel and not for the fender. Sometimes if you put the fender on first, you're thinking too much about what the brakes are doing in relationship to the fender. The fender's not the important part in this relationship. It's what the brakes are doing with the wheel. So we got that adjusted right. We're going to have to do the centering again a little bit perhaps, but at least we got the adjustment correct in the first place. Now we're going to completely remove the nut on the back of the brake and the washer. There's still another part, a thicker washer. That one will stay on the bolt that holds the brake to the fork. Go ahead and slide the fender in onto the bolt, replace the washer and the 10mm nut that holds everything on. Let's leave that loose for just a moment without tightening all the way. In your bag here, you will find 2 more small bolts or machine screws with washers. You can use these to attach the fender struts to the bottom of the fork here. Let's turn this almost all the way in, but don't make it completely tight. We'll leave all the hardware just a little bit loose so we can adjust the fender, make sure we get exactly what we want. Fenders are never precision parts. They do require a little bit of finessing, adjusting. Put that bolt in there. We have it a little bit loose. You can see my fender is not lined up with my wheel here. It is diving down to the left side of the bicycle here, okay? In the front, it actually looks pretty good. Let's go ahead before we tighten anything. Let's just pull this fender over a little bit. That wasn't enough. I'm going to squeeze the struts and just push it pretty firmly with my hand. Now it's more lined up. That looks really nice right there. Let's go ahead and tighten the bottom bolts down now. Again, these just need to be fairly firm. Don't give this all the torque that you can. You can strip these bolts pretty easily if you go too hard on the torque. There we go. We'll tighten the brake, and then we'll address centering issues again if we need to. When I tighten this one down, this will also be just a firm tightening, not nearly as tight as I can go, because you can see that as you tighten that nut, it affects the positioning of the brake. The brake will rotate towards or away from the rim. We just want it centered and also tight enough to hold the brake in place. You want to squeeze the brake a few times. Check to see that the brake pads are clearing the wheel. The wheel is spinning nicely, not rubbing on the brakes. When we apply the brakes, it's also not hitting the fender. Sometimes the fender will be leaning one way or the other in the front as well as the back. In my case, it's actually lined up really nicely right now. But if not, or if it's too close to the brake, we don't like what it is, feel free to just give it a good, firm but gentle pull this way, that way, to the left, to the right, upward. Just make it so that the fender is lined up with the wheel, is not touching the tire, is not impeding the brakes at all. Right now we have a perfect adjustment. Sometimes you also need to, like we did in the rear, kind of play around with the struts a little bit. Just do whatever you need to get those fenders adjusted properly. The last step now before the test ride is to go ahead and pump up the tires. In this case, the bike arrived mostly pumped up, but it will not have the full 65 psi. Bicycle tires and tubes, they all lose air over time. Usually after a couple weeks, you already need to pump it up again. Most riders who ride regularly will actually test their tire pressure every ride and bring it up because it has a tremendous effect on the quality of your ride. This is a 65 psi tire. I would keep it at 65 psi all the time. As it loses air over a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks time, you may not notice, but it will make the ride much slower, much more sluggish. It's a big difference between, say, 35 psi and 65 psi. The 65 psi will be a fast, nimble, enjoyable ride. The 35, you'll just feel like you're going much slower than you should be. So always keep that pumped up all the way. These have normal Schrader valves like your car has. All of our bikes have the Schrader valve, which is the normal one. There's another type of valve that I won't mention. None of our bikes have that other type. So just use this one. This is the same fitting as for a car. However, you should never fill up at a filling station, at the gas station. The air comes out at a volume that's good for a car tire. For a bicycle tire, it holds so little volume, you just really will be in danger of popping the tire before you even have a chance to take that nozzle back off of the valve. So anyway, check that, the pressure on the tire every week or two. Make sure it's topped up at 65 psi. Take it for a test ride, make sure everything rides correctly. You won't really know until you ride if there's any sort of issues or not. At this point, the bike should function perfectly, but the test ride will let you know. Also, there may be things that are rubbing that you're not aware of while it's sitting here. Maybe there's some rubbing that we don't know about on the fenders. Perhaps the chain is rubbing against the chain guard a little bit or something like that. In that case, again, the chain guard is a little bit like the fender. It can just be kind of pulled or adjusted a little bit just to give it that extra 1/16 of an inch, the extra millimeter or two of clearance that you need. Again, everything should function perfectly at this point. However, the test ride will really tell you if everything is in order. Thank you so much. This is a fantastic bike. It's a beautiful bike that also rides quickly and has a nice upright riding style. This is a classic design that's been around for really many years. This is our take on it. So you should have a great ride now. Thank you so much. This was Peter for 630 Bicycles. This was the Ride in the Park Men's 7-speed, and we're in the garage.